Welcome to another Dog Mind Gears podcast episode. Today we are talking about an awesome ancient tale.
We really are. I mean, it's a topic that's just so rich.
It really is.
Yeah.
So if you're listening right now, you have definitely seen a corgi. Like there's no way around it. You know the look, right? The short little legs, the massive ears.
Oh, yeah, and the famously fluffy back end.
Yes, the fluffy back end that has literally launched, 1,000 internet memes. But what you likely don't know is the epic magical lore hiding just beneath that adorable waddling exterior.
Because it's not just a cute dog, there is serious history there.
Exactly. So today we are taking a deep dive into an incredible piece from Dogazilla magazine. It's titled Corgis and Fairies, Legendary Ancient Connection. And we are just going to read you a bedtime story here.
No, not at all. We're going way deeper than that.
Right. We are going to use this Welsh folklore as a lens to understand a much deeper question. Like, how do human beings use mythology to explain the exceptional or even baffling traits of the natural world around them?
Which is such a fantastic framing for this deep dive.
Yeah, because we're going to break down the genetics, the history, and the sociology of why these dogs have captivated us for centuries.
Right, because we look at these dogs today and, we see charming, somewhat comical house pets, but their history paints a completely different picture.
Completely wild picture.
Exactly. To truly understand the origin of the corgi, we have to explore the psychological need of ancient societies to basically elevate their most valuable working animals into the realm of the divine.
So true.
And to do that, we have to travel back in time to the harsh, misty environments of ancient Wales.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to start with the name itself. Where does the word corgi actually come from?
Well, it comes directly from the Welsh language.
Okay.
Cor translates roughly to dwarf, and guy is form of the word for dog. So quite literally, it means dwarf dog.
Dwarf dog. I love that.
Yeah, but that linguistic root doesn't just describe their physical stature, it actually ties them directly into the mythology of the region, specifically regarding a group of beings known as the Tylwyth-Teg.
Okay, the Tylwyth-Teg. How does that translate?
Yeah.
And who exactly were they in the minds of the ancient Welsh people?
It translates to the fair family, or the fair folk.
Right, because I imagine we aren't talking about like tiny fairies with butterfly wings flying around dandelion patches, right?
You're entirely right to make that distinction. In ancient Celtic folklore, these were not the delicate, cartoonish fairies of modern pop culture. Not at all.
So they weren't exactly Tinkerbell.
Far from it. They were formidable, deeply powerful nature spirits, and they lived in a parallel dimension that closely overlapped our own.
Like hidden just out of sight.
Exactly.
Right.
Hidden away in the fog, the dense forests, the green hills, and they could be benevolent, but they were also dangerous and demanding of respect.
Wow.
And according to the old tales, the corgi was intrinsically linked to them. Like, they were the creation and the exclusive property of the Tylwyth-Teg.
So if I'm, say, a medieval Welsh farmer looking at this strange, short-legged dog, I'm not seeing a genetic mutation. I'm seeing a magical artifact.
That's exactly how they saw it.
And the article points out that there's supposed, physical proof of this connection right on the dog's back.
Yes, the infamous fairy saddle markings.
Right.
If you look closely at many corgis, especially those with certain color variations, you will notice a darker patch of fur right across their shoulders and back.
Oh, yeah. It looks remarkably like a small harness or a saddle.
Exactly. It really does.
I've definitely seen that. But scientifically speaking, what is actually causing that pattern? Is it just a random coat variation?
What's fascinating here is the underlying genetics. That pattern is typically the result of something called agouti coloration.
Agouti coloration, okay.
Yeah, it is a dominant gene in dogs that affects how pigmentation is distributed along individual hair shafts.
So it's not just one color per hair.
Right. Instead of a single solid color, the hair actually has bands of light and dark pigment.
Oh, wow.
And depending on how those banded hairs group together across the dog's anatomy, it can create a really distinctive shadow across the shoulders.
So science tells us it's just the agouti gene manipulating melanin production.
Exactly. But ancient folklore looked at that exact same biological mechanism and decided, hey, that is a literal seat for a magical rider.
That's a brilliant way to look at it. And the folklore claims this saddle was where the fairies sat because these dogs had a dual role in fairy society.
I absolutely did.
First, and definitely the most surprising, I think, is their role as battle steeds.
Yes. In the ancient legends, corgis were fierce, loyal warriors. They were the elite cavalry of the fairy realm.
Which is just so cool to picture.
It really is. When the Tylwyth Teg had to ride into battle against rival factions or, dark subterranean forces, they didn't ride miniature horses.
Right, they rode corgis.
They rode corgis. The legends describe these dogs charging across chaotic, hidden battlefields, fueled by incredible stamina.
While their fairy riders swung glowing swords on their backs. I mean, I have to admit, I'm having a little trouble visualizing a 10-inch tall dog functioning as a terrifying instrument of war.
It does sound a little wild to our modern ears.
Yeah, even with a fierce fairy on its back, it sounds a bit ridiculous. How did the people telling these stories reconcile the dog's tiny size with this epic mythology?
Well, it comes down to how Celtic folklore treats scale and perception.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
The magical realm simply didn't operate by human physical laws. The bravery, the ferocity, and the boundless energy of the dog that was the truth of the animal. So the myth simply scaled the world around the dog to match its enormous personality.
That makes so much sense. And when they weren't fighting evil, they were utilizing that same intense energy for a second purpose, right?
Yes, they were herding heroes.
Right.
Off the battlefield, the fairies relied on the corgis to herd their magical livestock across these hidden misty meadows.
And the folklore says that the saddle marking wasn't just a seat. It was actually imbued with magic that gave the dogs extraordinary agility.
Precisely.
So it's not just an aesthetic trait. In the myth, it is a functional piece of magical equipment.
Right. It was an explanation for how a dog with such short legs could dart, weave, and pivot with such blinding speed.
Right. If you picture a modern corgi doing what we call zoomies, just tearing around the living room, banking off the sofa.
Oh, the classic corgi zoomies.
Exactly. Displaying that manic, boundless energy. It suddenly makes total sense why ancient people thought, oh, that dog is clearly having a flashback to its days, charging into fairy battles.
It gives an incredible mythical weight to their natural behavior, doesn't it?
It really does.
But of course, the legend had to account for how a divine magical creature ended up in the mundane human world.
Right. Because if corgis were the exclusive prized property of the fairy realm, how did they end up sitting on human couches?
Exactly.
The Dogavella article highlights a story that frames this as a bridging of worlds.
Yes, a really lovely tale.
The legend goes that a highly curious corgi pup was wandering through the deep, misty woods one day, just following its nose, sniffing around the ferns.
As dogs do.
Right, until it stumbled upon a hidden, twinkling fairy garden.
A sanctuary completely hidden from the mundane world.
And instead of being chased off, the corgi naturally just started playing with the fairies.
Which is so on brand for a corgi.
It is. This part of the myth beautifully highlights the dog's inherent sociability. But here is where the story takes a turn that I genuinely struggle with.
Whoa. How so?
Well, according to the legend, the Tylwyth Teg were so charmed by this that they decided to gift corgis to humanity, specifically to kind human families and well-behaved children.
Right. That's the core of the myth.
But wait a second. If these dogs are the elite, hardened cavalry of the fairy realm and they are bred to herd erratic magical beasts, isn't handing them over to a human toddler a massive recipe for disaster?
That is a very sharp observation.
Because herding dogs are famously high-strung and nippy.
They are, and that cuts right to the heart of why this specific myth exists in the first place.
Really?
You are absolutely right. A working herding dog is not a stuffed animal. They nip heels, they bark loudly, and they need a job to do.
Right.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the pedagogical purpose of folklore in an agrarian society.
Pedagogical. You mean it was meant to teach something?
Yes. In ancient Wales, a good herding dog was literally the difference between a family thriving or starving.
Wow, that's serious.
Incredibly valuable assets. You could not have your children mistreating the dog, pulling its ears, or taking its work for granted.
Oh, so you create a myth.
Exactly. You tell the children, hey, this dog is a gift from the Tylwyth Teg. It is a noble fairy warrior sent here to protect you, but only if you are kind and respectful.
That is brilliant. The fairies intended for the corgis to act as guardians, sure, but the myth itself acted as a guardian for the dog.
Yes. It taught children foundational lessons about respecting working animals.
That completely reframes the story for me. It wasn't about fairies handing out pets. It was a societal tool to ensure the dogs were treated with the reverence they deserved.
Precisely.
And that reverence is a perfect transition to the next piece of folklore, because the bond between humans and corgis gets much more solemn than playing in gardens.
It gets quite deep.
Yeah, here's where it gets really interesting. The article details an origin tale involving a human woman named Anne Biddlecombe.
Ah, yes. The famous fairy funeral legend.
Yes. The story states that Anne was walking alone along a quiet, foggy shore one evening.
Setting a mood.
Totally. Suddenly, she witnessed an incredible glowing fairy funeral procession. The fairies were carrying their deceased friend, and the fallen fairy was resting on the back of a corgi.
Such a powerful image.
It is. There was a whole line of corgis following behind, walking in a quiet, respectful procession, all wearing saddles made of intricate flowers. Anne was deeply moved. She befriended the fairies out of respect for their ritual, and they gifted her a pair of these dogs, which supposedly started the famous Pembroke Welsh Corgi breed line.
It's a beautiful story.
It is, but I have to call a time out here. The article mentions Anne Biddlecombe was from Dorset, England.
Right?
If the Corgi is a fundamentally Welsh dog with Welsh origins, why is the most famous origin story happening across the border in southern England?
It is a great geographical catch on your part.
Thank you. I was very confused by that.
Well, the Anne Biddlecombe story is a classic example of folklore migration and adaptation.
Okay, so the story moved.
Yes. As the dogs themselves were traded or gifted across borders over the centuries, the stories traveled right along with them.
Oh, that makes sense.
The English, who were fascinated by these unique Welsh dogs, absorbed the folklore and localized it. They inserted an English protagonist to give themselves a claim to the breed's magical origins.
Wow. Everyone wanted a piece of the magic.
Exactly. But the geographical inconsistency doesn't invalidate the emotional truth of the story.
What is the emotional truth there, though? Why a funeral?
Because a funeral is universally one of the most sacred, intimate, and culturally significant rituals any society has.
True.
By placing the corgi at the very center of the fairy funeral, literally carrying the weight of the fallen and participating in the mourning, the myth is elevating the dog.
Oh, I see.
In a harsh agricultural society where animals were often treated merely as tools, this story tells us that our ancestors viewed the corgi as a spiritual equal.
That's incredible.
They weren't just livestock. They possessed the emotional depth and dignity required to participate in sacred rites. It is a profound statement of empathy between human, dog, and myth.
I love that. We elevate them in our stories because we elevate them in our hearts.
Very well said.
But, as deeply moving as flower-saddled funeral processions are, we do have to peel back the mythology entirely for a second and look at the cold, hard history.
We do.
Because there is no archaeological record of glowing fairy swords or tiny flower saddles.
Sadly, no, there isn't. But the reality is arguably more impressive because it relies on tangible biology and grueling physical labor.
Okay, lay to me.
The factual grounding of the corgi is that they were indispensable Welsh herding dogs tasked with driving cattle across incredibly rugged terrain.
So we talked about the fairy saddle being a genetic trait called a goody. What about their actual shape?
Ah, yes, the shape.
Because the myths attribute their short height and long bodies to dwarfism, claiming the heavy magical saddles weighed them down over generations. What is the biological reality there?
The biological reality is a genetic condition called achondroplasia.
Achondroplasia?
Yes, it is a specific type of dwarfism that affects the length of the limbs but leaves the torso proportional.
Right.
But here is the critical part. This wasn't a random defect that humans just decided was cute. It was a highly specialized, selectively bred advantage.
An advantage? Wait. How is having tiny legs an advantage when you are trying to herd a massive, stubborn, and potentially angry cow?
It comes down to the biomechanics of a cow kick. When a cow kicks out defensively, it kicks high and backward.
Right.
If you are a tall herding dog, like a collie, you have to be fast enough to jump back out of the way.
Well,
But a corgi operates entirely under the radar.
that is wild.
They would nip at the heels of the cattle to drive them forward, and when the cow inevitably kicked back, the corgi was already safely under the trajectory of the hoof.
They literally ducked under the bellies of kicking cattle.
Exactly.
It's like comparing a tall pickup truck to a low-clearance sports car. The corgi is built with a low center of gravity, specifically for tight cornering and navigating dangerous, unpredictable obstacles.
That's a perfect analogy.
That requires immense real-world bravery.
It really does, and that is why the myth and the reality are perfectly aligned in spirit.
So what does this all mean?
Wow.
It means that whether they are dodging the glowing swords of rival fairy factions or ducking the heavy hooves of angry cattle in a muddy Welsh pasture, the Corgi's core traits remain exactly the same.
Absolutely.
The courage, the stamina, the agility, that is all historical fact. We simply dressed their real-world bravery up in fairy tales because it seems superhuman to us.
That is a perfect synthesis.
Thank you.
And it is precisely that bold, undeniable personality that eventually propelled them out of the working pastures of Wales and onto the global stage.
I mean, they went from herding cows in the mud to literally living in palaces.
They did. The turning point for the breed's modern history was undeniably the British royal family.
Right, of course.
In 1933, King George VI, who was then the Duke of York, brought home a Pembroke Welsh Corgi named Dookie for his daughters.
Dookie. That's a great name.
It is. And one of those daughters, of course, was the future Queen Elizabeth II.
She had corgis her entire life, right?
Yes. For nearly a century, she was rarely seen without them. Her lifelong devotion to the breed completely transformed their global image.
From farm dogs to royalty.
Exactly. They shifted from rugged, working-class fairy friends to the ultimate symbols of aristocratic British life.
But their evolution didn't stop at Buckingham Palace.
No, it certainly didn't.
In the modern era, the Corgi has conquered an entirely new domain, the internet.
Oh, they are undeniably one of the most prominent breeds in digital culture today.
You open literally any social media app, and you see them everywhere.
Everywhere.
There are those massive beach meetup videos where hundreds of corgis are just sprinting across the sand.
Those are incredible.
And there are accounts with millions of followers dedicated to a single dog navigating a staircase or just staring down a vacuum cleaner. It feels like they were tailor-made for viral content.
Which just goes to show that their inherent magic hasn't disappeared at all.
That's so true.
The very traits that made them perfect fairy mounts in ancient folklore, their highly expressive faces, their surprising athleticism, and their larger-than-life personalities are the exact same traits that make them perfect for capturing human attention today.
So they're still bridging worlds, just doing it through smartphone screens instead of misty forests.
It's a fascinating journey from myth to pasture to palace to pixel.
I love that. Pasture to palace to pixel.
And this raises an important question for you to consider as we wrap up our deep dive.
Lay it on us.
We spent all this time talking about how ancient people used folklore and fairy gifts to gatekeep and elevate this specific breed of dog.
Right.
Today, we don't use fairy stories, but we do use strict pedigree registries, DNA testing, and highly exclusive kennel club standards to define what makes a corgi pure.
Oh, wow.
So are our modern scientific breed standards really that different from the ancient myths? Or are we still just inventing complex rule books to satisfy our deep psychological need to feel like our dogs belong to an exclusive, almost magical lineage?
That is such a wild thought to leave on. I'm going to be thinking about that all day. Well, if you want to check out the article that inspired today's episode, visit the award-winning dog publication Dogzilla magazine at dogzilla.com. Also, we wanted to let you know that you can suggest the topic for some of the next podcast episodes if you have a cool topic comment, or write at our Doggy Delight Substack profile. And do not forget to subscribe to the Dog Mind Gears podcast there too. Ha ha ha. Rotate those gears in your mind. Talk to you later.